we mean when we say trauma? I've noticed a trend recently on social media. I shouldn't really be noticing trends on social media. It's not good for one's mental health. But I've noticed there's a trend to start saying, hey, stop calling everything trauma. So what I want to do is I want to present the case for trauma, and then I'm going to present the case against trauma with a subtle difference very quickly. The case for trauma. So the social media post I'm reading saying, stop saying that everything is trauma. Stop saying that everything that forms human behavior, an attitude, a cognition, a way of being in the world is rooted in trauma. Let's drop it. Let's drop it completely. Okay, so my defense of that would be, actually, the evidence is pretty clear that everything is, in fact, trauma. Most of human culture is rooted in trauma. Most of what we believe to be true, most of our perceptions of the world are rooted in trauma. Indeed, you could argue that learning itself is a kind of trauma. When something is gouged, it's like the first way that we wrote wasn't with ink. It was through gouging onto wet clay. The first tablets that we have of human writing were gouged into clay, and then effectively the pens themselves were like knives that you gouged into the clay. That's how we wrote. When we learn, what is gouged into our brains, what is gouged into the nervous system, is learned largely through pain. Largely through pain. Some of it through pleasure, but most of it is learned through pain. It's traumatic. When people tattoo themselves, which they've been doing for as long as, we don't know how far back that goes, that people have been modifying their bodies and decorating themselves, piercings, gougings, elongation of bones, even breaking of bones to convey status, ritual scarification. All of this is trauma. It's a kind of gouging into the softness of something. So actually, I'm against this new trend now. So the trend now is to be anti-trauma culture and like stop saying that everything is trauma. It isn't. So my defense of it would be to say, well, actually, kids, it is all trauma. It actually is all trauma. And saying that people's beliefs, attitudes, or mental health issues are not trauma-based is counterfactual. We have no basis for disproving the negative hypothesis that it's not. You can't show conclusively that any mental health issue, if it's not a physical issue, you can't say that it's not trauma-based. In the age of epigenetics, it's almost a redundant point. That's my defense of trauma. My attack on trauma would be something along the lines of saying there is a kind of trauma culture. So there's the thing itself, and then there's the foam or the echo of the thing itself. And as you know, social media spaces become echo chambers, effectively. And there is a depravity in trauma culture. There is a full degeneracy in trauma culture. So I would say, actually, everything is trauma. So you take, keeping my mouth close to the microphone, you take a statement and you go, this is true. And then what frequently happens is people hear that statement and they jump to, oh, well, because you believe that's true, I suppose you believe all of this as well. And to those of you who know me, I tend to take a contrarian position on a lot of things. And actually, no, everything is trauma. Everything is traumatic. Human life, human experience is quintessentially traumatic. Culture is trauma. Language is trauma. Thoughts are trauma. Science, technology, it's all trauma, actually. But I agree with the criticism of the depravity that evolves from trauma culture, particularly online trauma culture. So I would say everything is trauma, and therefore you should seek to be strong, and therefore you should seek to be self-disciplined, and to move yourself out of your comfort zones and to develop your skills and your strengths to reduce the amount of trauma you experience in the future and to dilate your capacity to cope with it and even to thrive in the face of trauma, would be my conclusion. Other people have gone, everything is trauma, and therefore, and come to a very different philosophical stance. The depravity of the online trauma culture is to say everybody is weak and everybody is soft, and everybody therefore should be provided with a safe space, and that our priority should not be to make the individual stronger, but to make the collective more respectful of the needs of individuals. And this is what I would say is depravity. And I know how crazy that sounds. I'm aware, like that sounds a little extremist. It sounds crazy. So if you denounce something as degeneracy or depravity, you immediately sound like an extremist. But I mean it carefully. I'm using the words carefully, and I have observed people degenerate inside of the intrinsic depravity of online trauma culture. They start to see themselves as hurt. They start to see themselves as broken, but not as hurt and broken in the way that everyone is hurt and broken, not as hurt and broken in the way that the strongest, most powerful people throughout history were also hurt and broken in a way that is unique and debilitating. And these two things are where the real degeneracy lies. Your pain, my pain, all of our pain and suffering is not unique. It is not special, nor does it make us special, nor does believing that it makes us special or clinging to the specialness that it brings going to take you anywhere good in life. It can only lead to a degeneration of your personality, of your ego, of your capacity to survive and thrive in the world naturally. It just follows. The one simply follows the other. There is nothing unique about your pain or your trauma. And if you hold to that, or you find an emotional reaction from that very simple statement, you really should seek help from another person soon, because it's extremely dangerous to walk around with that in your head. Think rationally for a moment. In all of human history, throughout all the generations of humans who've ever lived, you really have come to the conclusion that your experience was uniquely painful? No. That is statistically not just unlikely, it is an absolute impossibility. The second part of it is the conclusion that therefore you're debilitated. Does trauma debilitate? When people train and become stronger and become field and track athletes, and they hurl the javelin and they toss the discus and they run the far distance very quickly, are they not traumatized? Are they not specifically and directly and carefully and scientifically traumatizing their bodies over time so that the body becomes stronger? Isn't that what weight training is? And isn't that what strength training is? You send a stimulus to the muscle that is traumatic, that actually creates destruction so that it grows back stronger. Trauma is not debilitation. Trauma is not unique. Everybody who lives as a human being on this planet is traumatized. So I would want to retake that ground. And you could say, well, that's because you're an extremely boring Freudian psychoanalyst. I would say, yes, but what if the opposite were true? And here I am a naive Hegelian. What if actually by denouncing and negating and denying trauma, you're actually simply making it worse? You're actually the new flex that I'm seeing online is, you don't need this trauma. You don't need this hashtag, mental health. You don't need to declare yourself to be sick. Be strong, stand up for yourself, be self-disciplined. Saying that everything is trauma reduces the meaning of the word. And I don't hold to that. I actually think, no, the truth is It's complex, it's nuanced, and trauma actually is the quintessential nature of the human experience. It is traumatic to be alive. It is traumatic to be a human being, and everyone you meet is traumatized to some degree. Some people have been stressed by the trauma, so you could say there's perhaps, if you wanted to break it down this way, maybe like a healthy level of trauma, and some people have been broken by the trauma. Some people, the bolts of their personality, of their functioning, have actually sheared off, and that now they need help. It's not going to make them stronger. Nietzsche was wrong. Nietzsche was wrong. Not everything that doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Actually, some of the things that don't kill us leave us permanently wounded and can make us weaker and can lead to death later on. So I would say the proper thing to do is to reclaim it and say, actually, everything is trauma. But that doesn't mean we should be a bunch of thumb-sucking whinge bags who pray to the goddess of collective solutions and demand more nannying and more state-based, top-down authoritarian action to make us safe. That's like kids in a kindergarten. That's no way for adults to thrive and to move forward. We should say, yes, everything is trauma. And therefore, we've come to a different conclusion. We want to be stronger. We want to be more skilled, and we want to be more capable. Our pain is not unique, and our pain does not debilitate us. We've chosen a different way. Imagine brainwashing people into believing that because they've had a perfectly normal, perfectly standard human experience, they're in some way permanently debilitated from living a fulfilling life. I think that's immensely cruel, and I'm dead against it. But I don't think the way to combat it is by telling untruths about the nature of trauma.